KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan. Has he ever been on a bender, Moriarty? Dagan, I'm curious. Have you ever gone on a bender before? Like really like gone hard?
Let me confirm the definition of a bender for you.
Yeah.
Because I'm not exactly, I might be unclear on this. So a bender is, I guess, in particular with drinking, right? It's like a multi-night or multi-day drinking escapade, right? It's like going off and binging for a day, maybe multiple days, more than one day or one night.
Right. That's how I've always looked at it, is like you would, and I'm looking at this thing now. It says the slang term can mean a drug party, an extended period of continued drug use. For instance, if you might pass out for a short time, wake up, and then start drinking again.
Oh, it doesn't have to be alcohol. Okay.
Yeah, I would assume not.
Any kind of substance.
Yeah.
No, never. I never have. That would be crazy to me. Like I even pictured like this, and maybe because I'm a little tame by comparison to most people, but I envision drinking one night to an enormous degree, then drinking the next day and into the next night. That would be insane to me. I remember what it was like in my 20s to be hungover for just one crazy night. So I can't imagine magnifying that by like 3 times.
Some say the best cure to a hangover is to just begin again.
That's what they say, but I never went in for that philosophy. What about you? Have you ever done that where you just kind of did a whole weekend of I was going to say carousing, but that has something to do.
Oh my God. Maybe. I mean, maybe we did that too. Yeah, I've definitely, like, I don't know. See, because I think bender, that has a negative connotation. It's like the word selfish. I bring up before, where I'm like, the word selfish has this negative connotation, but it's really trying to describe something.
Yeah.
Like to be selfish.
Right.
Obviously, Ayn Rand writes a lot about that, one of my favorite philosophers.
Oh, interesting.
But I mean, that's like what her whole thing's about. But to me, I feel like if you remove, I'm not like, first of all, I don't do drugs. I don't do hard drugs. As I've said in the past, I did opium once on a mistake. But otherwise, because I thought it was weed. But I've never done coke or anything like that. I've been around anything you can imagine. So I wouldn't do that. But I've been around those kinds of people that do those kind, like bend like that for sure in my 20s. And I would say that there have been a handful of like weekends in Vegas or at a bachelor party. I remember one particular bachelor party for my friend Nate in San Diego, which was like a 3-day affair where I wouldn't call it a bender where it's like you're just going crazy, but I was drinking the entire time for probably like 72 hours. I mean, I was basically just drinking and smoking weed like
that makes sense.
Like, and it was fun, but I can't do that.
Bachelor party, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, which I've never been to one of those. Or every bachelor party I've ever was like a one-night affair,
Right. Oh yeah. I've been to those too, or even just dinners, but or like nights at the bar, like you said. But and then Vegas. I mean, I used to go to Vegas all the time. I love Las Vegas, and I consider your time there to be inherently kind of like a bender because you're there for 48 hours or something like that, and
it's kind of the point.
Right. You get there. I'm drinking at dinner. I'm drinking at the table. I'm drinking at the pool. I'm drinking at the buffet.
See, that makes sense.
So that's kind of what I would consider that, because I'm looking here at Oxford Language. They call it a wild drinking spree. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I've been on a bender.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I guess. So
and it doesn't have to involve a multitude of substances or multiple substances, right? It doesn't have to be drugs.
I don't think so.
Like a Slash, right? He's got the bottle of Jack, smoking a doobie. Yeah. Maybe there's some coke in there. I don't want to say heroin. I don't know Slash. But, everything's connected by just chain smoking, ciggies, right? That's what I think of, like the rock star type thing. It's just like everything. Women, throw women in there, whatever,
right.
Food, room service, the whole thing. Like it's just complete debauchery.
Like that Joe Walsh song. What's that song called? Oh, I have it here. Yeah, Life's Been Good, from his But Seriously Folks record, 1978. That's
awesome.
That's all about that lifestyle. It's awesome.
I love a rock star writing about that stuff. So candid.
Oh, that song is so good, dude.
I gotta go listen. What's the title of it?
It's called Life's Been Good.
And
it's all about like let me see here.
I'm gonna go listen to that. I'll see you guys later. See you guys later.
Yeah, it's so, first of all, it's like almost 10 minutes long, but
oh shit, it's an epic.
It's like he says, I have a mansion, forget the price, ain't never been there. They tell me it's nice. I live in hotels, tear out the walls. I have accountants pay for it all. You know, that kind of thing. So like that's what the whole song's about. It's awesome. It's a great song.
Just complete, yeah. The complete rock. You know what's so funny, dude? The whole time watching this, we're not going to talk about what we're going to do yet. You guys may have a hint now.
I mean, you know.
Well, you know, because you clicked on it, right?
Right.
But the whole time watching this show and writing, I didn't think of that once. I didn't think of like Bender, like rock star alcoholic.
I didn't either. I mean, I really didn't either. When I was trying to think about weird. I was trying to think about what you would bend, and then for some reason in my mind, I just came up, just the term Bender came up. I'm like, oh, it's kind of just funny on its own. But of course, as you mentioned, and as everyone knows, we're finally doing Avatar: The Last Airbender. This will be an episode for season 1, and we're doing this for the audience. This is our 200th episode now. We don't typically celebrate episode numbers. We do like milestone episodes. But for the 200th episode, I thought we would secretly watch Avatar: The Last Airbender, season 1. So I didn't let the audience know that we were doing this, which they usually can get a hint because we put out a topic thread on Patreon. So it always kind of teases things. But I thought this would pop up as a podcast and would be fun for an audience that for some reason was desperate for me and you to watch this.
You guys asked for it.
And I have a lot to say about it, but I wanted to let everyone know we appreciate your love, kindness, and support on Patreon, on free feeds, whatever the case might be. 200 episodes, 200 weeks in a row is a long time. Dave, do you have any reflections? It'll be 4 years
in February.
In February,
yeah. 4 years in February of doing this podcast. How crazy is that? It does not. I have to say, from the outset, does not feel that long. It doesn't feel like 4 years, which I would say is a good sign, right? It doesn't. I don't know what it feels like, but maybe it feels like half of that. Maybe 3 years, but I could at least trim a year off that. It doesn't feel like the sheer amount, the magnitude of work equivocates to 4 years. So that's pretty crazy that we've gone 4 years already. And we appreciate you guys. And, I have to say, credit where credit is due. This was Colin's brainchild. He wanted to give you guys something special for 200. This is an episode you guys have been asking about for 4 years, for the better part of 4 years.
It would really always make, this. I mean, the story, Dig, for everyone out there that doesn't know, is that on Patreon, at patreon.com/laststandmedia, we do elections every month. And so pretty much 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 topics we do on the show is selected ultimately by the audience as you guys vote and put your topic ideas out there. And Avatar: The Last Airbender would make so we have a primary election where everyone puts their ideas in. Then people vote on those ideas and it always shakes out to the most popular 5. Avatar: The Last Airbender would get into those 5 every month for probably 2 or 2.5 years, and then never get, like, literally every month, and then never win. And people were just getting infuriated, and I was so tired of seeing it that sometime a year or 2 ago, I was like, please just stop voting for this. We will do it at some point.
We're gonna do it. We promise.
And I must say, and I was reflecting on this because Micah and I watched it together. And I want to say before I start making fun of it, because I'm not making fun of it because it's bad. It's really good, and I want to say at the very top, it's much better than I thought it was going to be.
Oh, okay. I couldn't wait to hear your take.
Yeah, it's much better than I thought it was going to be. Okay. Am I confused why you wanted me to watch it? Yes, but it was much better than I thought it was going to be. But going into the experience, it was funny because I had said this a while ago, and then you just kind of put it off and be like, yeah, in my mind. And I remember telling you, and I'm like, we'll do it for episode 200. We'll do it for episode 200. And you can just kind of forget about it. And then here it is, episode 200.
Pops up.
So I sat down to watch it, and it's on Netflix, which is convenient. And
super convenient.
It's really cute. I mean, I think it's a really good, heartwarming, high quality, interesting show. The way I would explain it is, if I were born in 1994 instead of 1984, I would have loved this shit. Absolutely loved it. If this was on in prime time, elementary and middle school Colin, toy collecting Colin, licensed game Colin, all that, it would have been a different story. I can totally see all the makings of something that would be very intriguing to me.
Sure.
That said, I didn't watch it at 12. I watched it at 37. So that comes with like a little bit of experience and kind of wisdom as to what works and what doesn't. And I think one of the really impressive parts of the show is just how consistently good it looks. And I also think it just has a lot of character, a lot of love, a lot of great voice acting, good writing. I think it has all of it. I totally understand why people love it. But I also felt like it could have been 6 episodes instead of 20. I also felt like there was...
Okay.
I was telling... Again, Mike and I were talking about it, and I'm like, I really feel like almost half of the episodes served no purpose when you really think about it.
Okay.
They immediately say they're going from the south to the north or whatever they're doing. And then it's just these interstitial, meaningless stops along the way.
Stops along the way.
When really it could have been like that initial encounter. And I understand why it's not. They want to have 20 episodes, and of course, and it's very manga like to have all this just nonsense going on. But they have this. They could have had like the finding him, introducing him, and kind of getting outcast by the town, then saving the town, and then traveling, meeting the master, dealing with the Fire Nation in that way. And I was like, that could have been 2 hours. It really didn't need to be this long.
I could see that.
So it almost to me, I almost felt like I would have liked it more as a 2 or 3 hour movie where you just kind of trim the fat. Now I know we got that later on with M. Night. And here's the last thing I want to say, Dave, before I kick it over to you, because I mean, I really want to just listen to you here talk about this. I don't have very much more to say other than we'll obviously kick it in. But I somehow remained completely ignorant of this entire world forever. I knew in dribs and drabs, it was like this little kid. He's bald. He's got like an arrow on his head. I didn't know how it related to the M. Night movie. I wasn't sure until like last week if it even did. And also I read a little bit into that. And then, of course, at the same time, there's the James Cameron Avatar shit. So all of this Avatar stuff is coming out at the same time, literally within 2 years of each other.
So confusing.
Plus the movie, the M. Night movie a few years later. And yeah, it's confusing. And so I think I have to be honest. I didn't really know this was going on Nickelodeon. James Cameron's Avatar kind of comes out. I'm like, that looks fucking stupid. I immediately seal my brain off to Avatar, the blue Avatar. And then I think by virtue of it being named the same thing, it kind of got dragged in my mind where I was like, everything Avatar related. I don't know. They're not all related to each other, but they all have to kind of go away. And so somehow I just missed all of this. Like even with the Legend of Korra, I was reading about that and I was like, oh yeah. So then I'm like, so I started watching the show and I'm like, where's Korra? Yeah. And because I thought she was going to be like a character immediately. So I don't know what the hell is going on.
No.
So it was, from that point of view, it was a really interesting experience to be like, I don't know that I've been more ignorant of many topics going in than I was of this. Like I literally just didn't know.
Yeah. I totally hear you on that.
From that point of view, it's fun to uncover something that you really didn't know and think about where you were at the time. I was in college and I was like, yeah, I just think it was the wrong time. I just think it's like showing Saved by the Bell to someone.
Yeah, you're right.
I can watch Saved by the Bell every day. I love that show. But you had to have been there. I don't think you can really know what Saved by the Bell was. And I think this show benefits because it holds up, which I think is a great advantage. And it's truly good. It's not a piece of pop culture.
Yes, it is really good.
So anyway, I've said a lot. Digging Avatar: The Last Airbender, February 2005, December 2005, this first season. I'm really curious what you think about this. It should be noted, I guess we have a rare conflict of interest on this show. You work for Nickelodeon.
Yes, I do.
So we should note that. But I find the connection here strange. I guess when I walked away from Nickelodeon in the late 90s, let's say, I wouldn't have never expected something like this from them. This seems like something that maybe you would have even seen on MTV more than you would have seen on Nickelodeon. And certainly not, like if you think about, not Liquid Television, but you think about Daria and stuff like that, right? Like they took a few risks. You can imagine that they were like, oh, we want to do this anime thing or whatever. And Cartoon Network certainly would have been a more logical place for it to land too.
Yeah, now you would think, sure.
So, I mean, just talk to me about the show. I'm just, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, now too, you think of something like Netflix. This would be, which, Netflix is developing a live action version of this now. But you would think this would have been appropriate for Netflix circa 2021. But it is. There's so much to say, and there's so much crazy stuff to start. It's Colin and I's first journey, our first steps with this series and this property and this franchise. And I totally know what you're saying about it sort of being in a different generation's wheelhouse, age-wise, because I kind of channel my 8-year-old self, and I could see myself really getting smitten with this series as a kid. I think this series would have gotten its hooks into me.
Definitely.
And I do wonder about our audience. First of all, I'm glad the consternation is over for you guys and girls.
Yeah,
I'm glad we're finally covering it. Hope we could do it justice. But I do wonder which of our audience age specifically kind of went in for wanting this topic, because I could really see like any kid from like 6 to maybe preteen, early teens really being like completely fascinated with this show. It's really kind of special. So I'm kind of channeling like a 2005 perspective for this. And, we finally get to see what all the hype's about. It was completely off my radar too, even as an animator. Oddly enough, I think I've seen a couple of episodes between this initial 3 seasons and Legend of Korra. I probably caught a few episodes here and there and just watched and just tried to sate my curiosity a little bit. For the most part, I hadn't seen it, knew very little about it, knew it was a phenomenon, knew it had a huge following, and a lot of people loved it. And I'll tell you, Kyle, right from the start, what I found here in this first season of 20 episodes, and of course we're going to cover the entire thing, but what I discovered is a series with a very specific rhythm and style, which was a surprise to me. It's sort of a recipe mixing action, adventure, martial arts, mysticism, all of that, but with cleverly injected moments of comedy and levity and silliness, which I for some reason wasn't expecting. And the resulting sort of dish, right, is this delicious blending of fun and intricate story and really thoughtful world building and awesome complex characters that you really find yourself rooting for. And all the main characters, at least in this first season, sort of evolve and change and grow, which comes out of this wonderful and nuanced writing. And I don't know if I was a little biased going in, or I was expecting less because it was Nickelodeon or because it was a quote unquote kid show, which I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit because I should be above that as an animator and somebody who really roots for thoughtful children's content. But so far, what I see is I get a very surprisingly ambitious, ultimately very satisfying experience built around carefully juggling tension and joy. Our tension with the action and the set piece stuff and the adventure and the joyful bits of levity. And it's all sort of constructed upon a foundation of very rich and really amazing characters. And just a few, I would say every main character, 5 or 6 of them, possibly 7, are really, really compelling characters that you really want to see in an episodic, serialized nature. You want to see what's next for them. Bad and good, antagonist and protagonist. And I love that the show always managed to break up the drama and the tension with this sort of flavor of humor just when you need it. Now, I say just when you need it because I'm looking at it from a 10-year-old's perspective. I think it probably could have been a little less predictable insofar as like, all right, we're going to push the drama and the tension just far enough, and then we're going to break it up with levity. It's very systematic in a way, but I could see why. It's designed to be appealing to children. And I think that crosses over into an adult appeal too. Any good children, think of Pixar's content, right? Any good children's content crosses over to just being appealing on a human level. So I think ultimately what you get is a series that not only entertains, but also challenges kids and never talks down to them. So again, sort of transgressing into just good adult content. And something that I thought was fun, I think mixing the magic and the martial arts and the action and everything, and then kind of giving a little bit, not a doctrine, not preachy, but giving lessons on friendship and jealousy and anger and fear and loyalty. And the writing doesn't shy away from, which I think is a little less surprising now, but you go back 15 or 16 years. The writing doesn't shy away from pretty heavy stuff for a kid's show. Murder, genocide, vengeance, hatred and racism, family, betrayal, a little bit of romance, things like reincarnation. I mean, this, for a Nickelodeon show, it's interesting, Kyle. I grew up with a show, ironically, on Nickelodeon. So this Nickelodeon show called The Mysterious Cities of Gold, which was another animated, episodic, long adventure serial that Nickelodeon broadcast. That specifically was a French-Japanese co-production. Very high quality, really story and character driven. Really reminded me a lot of this. But the thing with Mysterious Cities of Gold, it didn't have that sort of kid-facing levity and humor, which I think is a big part of the recipe in this case. But it was interesting that this sort of seemed like the next generation of Mysterious Cities of Gold, which we grew up with, which was also a wonderful series. But I think this series does it a little differently. It's a little more colorful, and it's a little more, it might be just be a little bit more tailored for young people, which I think is awesome. So I think that's a great place to start the conversation. And I really, one of my most sought after things with this episode was to get your temperature on it, get your take on it, and see what you thought, because I, like you, had just completely missed a boat. And now I have to say, in me, it gained another fan. It's always, and it's always an unknown commodity going into something that's really sought after with a huge fan base that you have of yet taken part in, right? You don't know if you're going to go in and you're going to like it. There's always this sentiment, right? Of like, all right, how can all these people be wrong? But sometimes you go into something and it just doesn't click with you. You just don't get it. So in this case, it was nice and satisfying to see what all the hype was about and understand it. And I can. It's really, really good stuff. So what do you think? What's your mile high take on? You already said that you enjoyed it. Did Micah watch it with you?
Yeah, we watched it together. And,
okay, good.
She had never seen it either, and it's interesting because I was again. It's what I said earlier, I think, or kind of intimated, which is I get it. I totally understand why people love it. I totally acknowledge its quality. I think that any critic worth his salt can approach something objectively and be like, Call of Duty, for instance, always very contentious, and it's clearly a great game. It's clearly a great game. I don't know how anyone could look at that and be like, this game sucks. Okay. And I think that when you look at something like Avatar: The Last Airbender, when I started watching it, I was like, this immediately out. Actually, not immediately after the pilot, 2-part pilot, I think, or the intro kind of 2 episodes.
Sure.
I wanted to see if it fell off from there, because I know that sometimes they put a lot of their money and their animation heft and all of that into this. And by the way, I didn't realize until reading about it that 2 different studios were going back and forth and making these episodes. Yeah. And I want to know more about that, because I, in my opinion, I am sure fans have a preference, but I couldn't tell the difference really between them. So I want to know more about that as well. But it still is true, if I'm being honest, that it didn't click with me. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say it's like something that I want to necessarily see more of. I will, because we've put this time and effort into it.
You're not going to jump into season 2 before you have to.
No, exactly. Right. It's really good, but I just don't think it's constructed the way I want to absorb content usually. It actually does something, not to be nitpicky, that it bothers me a lot about shows that are coming from broadcast TV, in which they just get put on DVD or whatever. You need to edit out those commercial break things. You need to edit out those redundant animations that bring you in and out of, like, there's just little things like that.
Yeah.
Even it being caught in 4:3 is NTSC is so unfortunate. Like the aspect ratio of the show being in letterboxes. I was like, oh no, I couldn't believe that, because even shows, especially live action shows, but there were plenty of shows that were 20 or 30 years older that knew not to do that, because it wasn't always going to be the standard. And I was just kind of shocked that something so high quality could have missed the forest for the trees. Like, it's not G.I. Joe. This is like something, this just seems like a little something more budget. So at the same time, I noticed that, and it kind of held me back. But I must say, what I really enjoy about it is and you noted this, the focus on just a few characters. I like ensemble games, or your Final Fantasy VI's, for instance. But generally speaking, I would rather get to know fewer characters and get to know them better. And one of the interesting things that I think I missed, and I was kind of foolish in saying this to Micah, I was like, what? I'm like, is the Fire Country, the Fire Kingdom, whatever, even truly malevolent? Like, I don't even understand the political nature of this. And she was kind of explaining some things that I think I missed, because sometimes I like walk into the fridge and I just be listening to it in the background, or like something.
Yeah, sure. And it gets pretty complex.
Yeah, it does. And I must say that I kind of lost focus in the middle, and then I was drawn back. The last 3 or 4 episodes, I was just totally like staring at the TV and was really into it, which is why it almost felt like one story just from that point, going back to the 3 episodes.
Yeah, it
but
makes sense.
But I do like the main characters, Katara and Sokka a lot. The Avatar himself, obviously, Zuko. You have the awesome animals like Appa and Momo, who I think are awesome. I was remarking, I'm like, there must be a ton of dogs circa 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008 with these names.
Absolutely.
So talk to me a little bit about the main characters, this brother and sister character, the Southern Water Tribe they come from, and Katara's a waterbender, mysticist kind of character. I'm a little surprised that they kind of find the Avatar so quickly. That was
That's
a little.
a
I was like, why did it happen so quickly and so suddenly? But immediately you see the gravity of the situation, because the air nomads have died, and there's this ancient. It's not really ancient. It's 100-year-old war, and this thing just ongoing. And there's some weird political engagement between these various countries that have an affinity for an element, and so it has this very video game feel too, very Final Fantasy, old school Final Fantasy, like 4 Crystals feel. But talk to me a little bit about some of these main characters and how you might feel about them.
Yeah, absolutely, Kyle. You know, it's funny what you say about just the world and the video game thing. I definitely thought of that. You know, it's this journey. You're going to different places. You have the different environments. You have the woods and the fire and the ice and the lava, the volcano. It seemed like it was a very almost Tolkien-esque fantasy feel or / video game feel to the entire adventure. And you're going from place to place. It was interesting. It was ambitious. I can't wait to get into the animation with you. What I did to set the tone, Kyle, and hopefully to entice some of you guys who haven't seen it, and then hopefully I did it justice for you guys who are already fans of the show, is to just set the tone with what I think encapsulates the story. But you let me know if I did an okay job with this. So okay. I would say this. Our tale is set in a fantasy world consisting of 4 different nations. You have the air nomads, the fire nation, the earth kingdom, and the water tribes. And I think certain people, this is fair to say, certain people within each group have the ability to harness, wield, and manipulate the element corresponding to their respective home nation. And these telekinetically talented individuals are known as benders, which we talked about in the beginning of the show. When we're dropped into the story, the warlike Fire Nation has eliminated the air nomads already in an act of vicious genocide, which you have to pay attention to because they kind of skirt over that a little bit.
Yeah, like that was my whole confusion. She's like, what are you talking about? Like when I asked Micah this, and I'm like, but why? Oh, I guess I'm like, why did I miss this? So
I totally missed it.
They're almost like fascist.
Well, I started wondering, why are we meeting these other nations? Where are the air nomads? Like I guess they're saving that for last or leading up to that. It's some sort of payoff. But then I realized like 4 or 5 episodes in, I might even read it, that no, the Fire Nation coming into the story, when we're dropped in, the Fire Nation already eliminated those guys. So, and there are reasons for that, which we'll get to.
Hence the name, I suppose.
Right. It makes sense, right? So after the genocide, now the Fire Nation, this warlike Fire Nation, turns their attention to their conflict with the remaining 2 foes, the Water Tribes and the Earth Kingdom, right? By chance, 2 teenage siblings of the Southern Water Tribe discover the lost Avatar. He's a powerful, reincarnated figure who must maintain harmony and balance between the 4 nations. That's his charge. Very Anakin Skywalker-esque.
Yeah. Even the use of the word balance, I noticed that as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's completely calling up, I think, a lot of Star Wars. And the young Avatar Aang is revived by his new companions, and they agree to set out together to the North Pole, hoping to find a water-bending mentor for the 12-year-old Avatar, who is already a masterful airbender. Right, so when we meet him. And then, as the Fire Nation's war machine continues to rage under the leadership of Fire Lord Ozai, who we very rarely get to see, his banished son, my favorite character maybe, Prince Zuko, leads a campaign of his own in order to win back the favor of his father and restore his position within the powerful Fire Nation. The disgraced prince sets out to hunt for the Avatar. So our antagonist has his own ends, and there's a very strong reason why he's pursuing this MacGuffin, Aang, the Avatar. So start there, and then you have to talk about, of course, our main protagonist, our main hero in the adventure, which is Aang, the Avatar. Such a fascinating character. I remember going in or looking at this from afar years ago and saying, okay, who is this kid that looks like Krillin from Dragon Ball meets like a Shaolin monk? That's what it always seemed to me. And
I think,
you spoke to that too, especially with Aang himself. Like, he's so iconic. He's got the orange clothing, the orange garb. He's got the tattoos of the arrows, the air bending arrows. And he's such an icon that he does sort of elicit your attention even from afar. It's like, all right, what is this all about? I really need to know. And it's so interesting that that's only been satisfied, ultimately days ago, and only one, being only one season, it's partially satisfied. But I really liked his protagonist. First of all, I found the character very likable. He's actually 112 years old, but of course he takes on the appearance of a 12-year-old boy due to this century-long suspended animation while encased in this block of ice, or this iceberg, again rescued by these two teenagers of the Water Tribe. And Aang is the Anakin Skywalker character. He's the legendary Avatar type figure charged with preserving balance and peace in this world through his mystical powers, basically. And already an extremely talented airbender, which is fun to see. Some good action stuff. Aang is rescued by these two teens who agree to accompany him to the North Pole so he can learn how to bend water. So the goal is, the Avatar is the only figure in this whole world who has the power to bend all four elements. He's the only one that we know so far that has the power to, or the capacity to, bend even more than one element. And that's part of his power, is that he has this bond with the mystical world or the spirit world. And also he has the ability to bend all four powers because he's aligned with no single one nation. He's aligned with every nation. He's like the ultimate diplomat. And what I love about Aang is he seems like a young and carefree, typical preteen on the surface, a typical 12-year-old, right? He's fun-loving and he's lighthearted and he's inquisitive and he just acts like a kid. But the cool thing about him is you're a little compassionate for him because Aang is obligated by his duties to serve as Avatar of this world, which is like the one reincarnated. There's only one ever, and they're reincarnated from generation to generation, from age to age, to look over the world and preserve the world. And it's like this heavy burden for a 12-year-old. So your heart's already with this kid. And the fact that he just acts so jovial and happy and lighthearted and just really essentially wants to be a little kid, but he's got this heavy load on his shoulders. I thought that was a really fascinating. Sorry, Aang. Wasn't going to go there. But it makes for a character you really want to get behind. You really want to get behind and
put a load on his shoulder. I know.
I get it. It makes sense.
It's funny.
It's a great character to build a story around, I thought.
I agree.
Very appealing.
I was going to say, you had brought it up earlier. I mean, he reminds me of Luke Skywalker in a lot of different ways. I really feel like they're similar characters. And I think that the story is very Final Fantasy like the first Final Fantasy.
It really is.
And which maybe people will learn a little bit more about because that prequel is coming out to PS5 next year from when we're recording this. But I feel like the Luke Skywalker connection is interesting. It's just a little different in the sense that Luke Skywalker isn't, yucking it up with Biggs Darklighter. Rather he has like a wide-eyed, starry-eyed optimism, excitement, wistfulness to him. And I think that kind of is similar to what's going on with Aang. He's just younger, and so it's a little more childlike.
Sure.
But they have the similar pressure. It's right on down to the balance of the Force and all of these kinds of things that run through them, or balance of the cacophony of four elements in this. But I'm curious to know more about what you think of Prince Zuko, because I actually am in agreement with you that I find him to be the most intriguing character because I'm not. I must just be missing something, but I just am not convinced he's bad, right? So there's some sort of grayness to him where you want to redeem him. He's almost like not to keep bringing Final Fantasy up, but Final Fantasy IV, almost like Cain, where you don't really know if he's good or bad or he's jumping in and out. He obviously has malevolent designs, but he seems much more concentrated on this other situation and might even be being manipulated. So, and I obviously like his relationship with his uncle and
Oh, it's so
really,
good.
really cool. But I think one of the most intriguing things to me is just, and obviously Zuko has his conflict, as you noted, with the Fire Nation itself. He's not even really acting on their behalf. And
Right.
Aang saves his life at the end of the season, as you would probably do in a. I was actually thinking that when they were leaving in the mirror, I was like, is he going to die? And then they actually says literally he's going to die if we don't take him. So, what do you think about Zuko and this kind of, because you have more of the Commander Zhao character that's overseeing everything and kind of acts more on behalf of the literally fascistic, malevolent Fire Nation, but I'm really intrigued by this gray character that
Oh, he's so
is
good.
much more focused on his own angst and kind of his uncle's interest in, I guess, seeing this through and helping him. That's totally uncoupled from the greater 100-year war that's going on around them. So, talk to me a little bit about Prince Zuko as a character.
Yeah, I think pound for pound, Prince Zuko is probably the character who I find most compelling. In fact, I found myself wanting to switch back over to him, even when with our heroes, who are all very, the three main heroes are all very likable. But I definitely found myself like, what's Prince Zuko up to? He's really such a fascinating character for me. He's, of course, our principal antagonist. And I think it's so clever to build a story around an antagonist that wants something or needs something. And here you have this disgraced and banished Fire Nation prince who we learn in increments more about his backstory and why he was banished and why he ran afoul of the Fire Nation eventually as this first season progresses. But, he's really leading this tireless campaign, this hunt to capture Aang, to capture the Avatar, hoping that in accomplishing that task, he'll restore his honor and his place back, at his father's side in the Fire Nation. So, and I think he's fascinating. I think he's compelling to look at. He has that huge scar over his left eye. His eyes partially closed. We know there's a story behind that. But here's the thing I found most interesting about this character and fascinating, actually, is the brilliant and unique voice acting. That voice immediately struck me as something that has such great dimension and texture. There's such a seething anger and hatred in that. And even through all, and what he wants, and that he was basically kicked out of his nation. So here's this young kid, this young teenage kid, for his youth, he has all these troubles and world weariness already, and he's got, again, similar to Aang,
Yeah,
similar to
pressure.
the kid he's pursuing. It's like he's got all this weight on his shoulders, but even through all that anger and that hatred and that hot-headedness, there's, and it's very sharp and pointed, and he's violent, and that comes out in the voice. But there's also this crackle and this cracking that reminds you that he's a kid. He's young. He's still growing up. And even for all the violence and all of that hatred and anger and rage, you still see some dimension in there. He's not a lost cause. Again, it's very Anakin Skywalker-esque in that you have this character driven by the need to restore his honor, and it makes him a fearsome enemy. And he's driven, he's fueled by this need to accomplish this goal and this blinding hatred. But in all of that he's a young man sort of hanging in the balance between humanity and crossing over into this monstrous ferocity. Is he going to be claimed by that rage? You feel like, almost like with Zuko at certain points, like one big push, if one more thing happens to this guy, he's going to fall over the precipice and just become like a full-fledged demon. And you're kind of hoping for that redemption, though. And it gives you just enough to hope for that, and just wish that, you know, you could reclaim his goodness. There's goodness in there somewhere. You know, how can we claim this guy over from the Fire Nation and turn him to good? So there's a really brilliant performance that I think is in the throes of the writing and the animation and the voice performance by Dante Bosco, which I think is just a rare treat in Western television animation. You never see that. You get that in anime, and oftentimes when we're watching subtitle things. But to hear that, I think, see that in a Western cartoon, and of course animated in South Korea, but largely a Western cartoon created in California, co-created in California, and to see that with a Filipino American voice actor and hear that in English and get that depth and dimension through a voice is just, you never see it. You just really never get that. And I was just really struck by the performance, the overall performance of this character. I just think he steals the show. You know, unfortunately he does steal the show.
Yeah, I gotta say, I mean, I gotta give it up to all of them. I feel like there's a lot of heart in the voice acting and in the characterizations. There's a lot of heart in the facial animations too, and we'll talk about that. But
sure,
I really feel like Katara, you know, the brother and sister, you know, Sokka, Aang, Zuko, the uncle, and even Haru and some of these other random characters that come in there, they're great. And I feel like I really especially like the brother and sister relationship of, it's unclear who's older.
wonderful.
Did they ever say? I don't know. Are they twins?
That's what I was thinking. Did they ever say that they're twins? They're siblings, obviously.
I missed that. But it's cool because it reminds me, not in any other way, but you and Dana, just in having this close enough ages where you don't really know who's who, but the girl kind of has the vibe of being the more mature one. The boy has the vibe of being the more wild one. And I think that that's a good archetype to pursue here, because it makes them quite lovable. And it doesn't, because there's no, I mean, maybe there will be, but because there's no real tension between Aang and Katara, it doesn't make some weird triangle, although obviously it would be an incestual triangle, but it doesn't make some weird triangle. And indeed, it seems like the three of them fit together and work together. And I would have loved to see the VO booths for this, because I feel like it would have it just seemed like they got good direction. They obviously got good writing, and it works really, really well. I also like the animal characters. I wanted to ask you about them. Appa, the flying six-legged bison. We have the lemur Momo. I really dig these characters as well. I assume that they became iconic. Again, I missed this all, so I don't know one way or the other, but I'm especially keen on this flying bison character. I really dig this design. I'm sure it's much more anime than even I know, but it certainly reminds me of, you know, a Miyazaki kind of situation. Yeah.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Talk to me a little bit about the animal, like the animal creatures. They don't talk, which is cool. So like they only interact with, it's almost like a R2D2 type thing especially with Momo, where
absolutely,
where he's kind of there and they're in on it and he knows, because there's a really cute scene at the end where Momo appears. They're digging out the dirt to get the lava from the volcano to go away from the town, and he like has a piece of dirt with him and he drops it and then like runs off. So like he's helping, like it, you know, it was very R2D2. So talk to me a little bit about how you feel about these animal characters.
Yeah, I think the season almost ends with Momo, like with a thing of Momo. It doesn't end, but almost ends with Momo. But yeah, you know, this series as a whole, Kyle, we know it's channeling whimsy. It's channeling fantasy. I thought a lot about Tolkien. And of course, it's channeling anime. That's a big part of the discussion. But I think you're absolutely right. It's very astute observation. I think this series on the whole is channeling a lot of Studio Ghibli, a lot of Hayao Miyazaki. And I think it starts with the Appa character. I immediately thought as upon seeing this character, it's like, oh, it's a flying Totoro cat bus with a bison head and a platypus tail. You know, it's taking a little bit of that Studio Ghibli influence and mixing it up. They do this really cool thing in this world where it feels really Earth-like, with like the vegetation and the stuff that they eat and fruits and vegetables and all that kind of stuff. But they do this really cool thing with the creatures where they take two seemingly familiar Earth-like creatures and they mash them up. So they may take like a catfish and a lion and mash them up. At one point, there's this really interesting thing where they do like a sea otter and a koala bear. So they do this really cool thematic thing where they mash up two familiar animals and they make their own thing out of it, which feels Earth-like. It feels very, to me, it feels very like Middle Earth, where it's like an Earth-like world, but it's not Earth, but something that should feel familiar. Like the martial arts and the mysticism and taking in Eastern culture and a little bit of Native American stuff. So a blend, which is really cool. But the Appa character is neat because they are very Star Wars like. You know, you have Aang's faithful steed, a creature that has some history with Aang, which I think is interesting. The only one really that we know for this part of the story, at least. And he's this loyal and protective, sometimes comedic, sometimes extremely lazy. So feels like a pet, feels like one of our dogs, you know. And this heroic trio's chief mode of transportation. I mean, they're not getting anywhere without Appa. And I love sort of that unexpected bit of character design where it's like you have this thing that's so massive and seemingly so heavy and cumbersome, must weigh tons and tons, like a bus, that can actually fly. I mean, that's good stuff. You could very easily make this sort of light and airy, feathery creature that flies, but this is more interesting. This is more fun. It's like, how is this giant, enormous bus-sized bison thing flying? It's just really fun character design and good stuff. And the Momo character too, like having a cross up, this mashup between a lemur. Everyone loves a lemur, so very clever to pull that in and give it wings, and you make it this cute Ewok-like animal sidekick companion, which again I think feels like borrows from the formulas of successful things that we know so well, like Star Wars, and just injects a little bit of that in. And also another vehicle for comic relief with the animal characters, and just a little bit of being able to inject another dose of levity into this story that's, you know, pretty heavy. That's pretty dramatic, melodramatic at times. So to be able to have the capacity to pull from characters like that, it's interesting. Like we talked about Battlestar Galactica recently on a show, and how that could have gone for 6, 7, 8 hours without any levity in it. And I think for kids, you got to be more mindful of that. For me, I would have liked a little less levity and to move the story along, because I'm so compelled by what's actually happening at the core of this thing. But when you're making something for kids, it's such a thoughtful and sometimes easy to miss thing to inject some humor and make it delightful also. And I think the animal characters are part of what helps achieve that.
Yeah, well said. I think the tension is cut nicely. I actually didn't mind the injections of humor. They often made me smile because I was trying to remember who this was for, and it's not for me, right? And it's for me, maybe if I had a boy to watch it with, or a girl to watch it with, like a child, and
absolutely,
and maybe a wink and a nod to you sometimes. But I really feel like they balanced everything, especially with the tension. The way the season ends, I was like, holy shit, this is actually getting pretty dark. When the screen goes red and it just stays that way for a while, I was like, I was thinking about 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds. I was like, this must have been frightening to some children.
Sure, I think it crosses over into that territory a little bit.
And
that keeps it compelling. They're going to want to tune in for season 2, you know?
Right. And I think they do it without blood, without gore of any kind. It's very G.I. Joe like action where the bodies end up on a pile, everyone's missing each other, no one's swords or projectiles do it.
Absolutely.
But it really works. In fact, I think it's very G.I. Joe. Like there's a scene towards the end when the Fire Nation's attacking the ice capital or whatever, and they have vehicles that are basically hiss tanks. And I was like, Jesus Christ, you can see the toy commercials here, but
how cool
I was like, oh my God, I would have been that was the moment where I was like, I would have been so into this when I was a kid. It just hit me too late. But I want to get into the kind of business aspect of it too. Again, I mentioned Nickelodeon picking this up. I feel like for the time, this was a peculiar project for them. I feel like it probably still would be, but certainly back then it was a peculiar project for them. And so I want to know more about that. And then I want to know more about this dueling studio structure they have there. And if one is I'm very curious if one is considered better than the other. I assume yes, but my eye wasn't caught by the animation in any bad way. Indeed, I wrote down in my notes, you often, I think you flatter me, but you often say that I am able to see some errors in
Oh, you're very
continuity
good with that.
and
Very
animation and stuff.
observational.
I didn't see
Sure.
anything in this. Like
No?
nothing. I'm not looking for it actively, but you see it. And you're like, oh shit, this is wrong, or this cell is missing, or whatever, the color, weird things like that. And I didn't see personally anything like that. This seemed to me to be a here's my interpretation, very high budget, very clean, high production, lots of attention paid to it. I just couldn't imagine that isn't true, because I've seen 80s cartoons, right? Like I've seen anime schlock. I've seen all of these different things. And this just seems to be of such an enormous quality. I don't know if I'm misjudging it. And that's why I was so amazed that it was 2 studios, because I guess that makes sense, because it gave each of them time to breathe. But
Sure.
it also doesn't feel uncontinuous to me. It doesn't feel like the product of, it doesn't feel like J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, right? It feels like they belong together. So talk to me a little bit about the production and where this comes from.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to digging into this aspect of the series, having not really seen much of it previously. And it was interesting what I found there. I mean, first of all, it's a co-production between Nickelodeon, of course, Animation in Burbank in California, and animation studios located primarily in South Korea. So technically, I know this is a very polarizing and divisive conversation to have, but it's really not anime because it's not created in Japan. I think this is close to anime. I think this is very close.
It's anime
but it's not
style.
Proper anime.
I just want to kick in real quick. We've had this conversation about JRPGs, wherein I don't know if it was on this show or on another show, where I was saying that we're making a JRPG at Lilymo.
Right.
It's a Japanese inspired style role playing.
There you
it's
go.
not made there. And so I think that's the same thing here.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't think I've ever thought about the 2 conversations in tandem before. That is a really great point, Kyle. Is that, and you know what's odd? I think this is really mixed up, but I really think what you guys are going to be creating is a JRPG, but I don't think this is an anime. So that's really not fair. So maybe I have to sort this out a little bit more. But what I found in watching these first 20 episodes was something that I was very impressed by, the sheer scale and scope of the animation production. Very rare, first of all, by Western television animation standards to go this big and this seemingly big budget. It is really impressive. It's really beautifully done. Talking about the character animation, there's gorgeous effects animation in the series, lush backgrounds, and 20 episodes so far of completely new environments from episode to episode, new environments, new episodic characters, new props, new vehicles. They're creating things from scratch in each and every episode. So the design was really, really design heavy. And also just the fact of animating a lot of this stuff on 2s, which is apparent, really beautiful animation. And just a level of detail that most Western animation of the last couple of decades and prior leave you wanting, right? Like when Sokka and Katara and Aang are walking in the sand, they're leaving footprints, stuff like that. Or they're walking on the beach and their footprints are dissipating or being overcome by the wake and the waves and the water lapping up on the sand. That level of detail in the effects and the shadowing and the highlighting is very rare in television animation because the budgets usually just aren't there for that. So they really, not only the creators, but the people that worked on it, both in California and at the animation studios abroad, and the people that were backing it, the executives really had a belief in that this thing was worth all of that, which is a pretty striking thing. And sometimes maybe things that people aren't even cognizant of in the world of entertainment is that there were people backing this. There were people that believed in spending this much money and spending this much time. I'm sure this took a long time compared to a lot of other things, especially by 2005 standards, not only to animate, but to design, to do the storyboards, the animatics, write the stories, kind of vet it from episode to episode and make sure everything was flowing at a certain degree. So really shout out to Michael DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, but also all the cast and crew of this thing, because from everything from the art to the voice acting to the editing is really beautifully crafted. And you don't often get to see that. You even see things in this where I realized early on where it was like there are scenes, much like a Studio Ghibli film, that are showcased, where maybe it's an action set piece or something that demands a little bit of really kinetic animation, really energetic stuff. And all of a sudden, it's like it's on ones. It's framed 20, it's shot 24 drawings a second, and you have like Aang running down the turret of the castle and jumping back on his glider. Something really beautiful in each episode. Maybe even 2 or 3 snippets that you get that are even showcased. So to almost be treating this like a feature film, or at least a very high budget OVA, where it doesn't even feel often like a TV series. There were very few egregious things where I was like, oh, that was done on the cheap. There were a couple of things that stood out, but very few glaring areas where it didn't seem like they were putting in their A game or their A team, which again is something that you just don't see. And you could see little clever shortcuts too, like Sokka and Katara often wear those 3-fingered gloves, so they don't have to handle all 5 fingers all the time for the two of the main characters.
Right.
There's really clever things that they do put in there that aren't egregious, that are just clever and smart for production. They could spend that money elsewhere, and they do. But that was the thing that really struck me. It was like, wow, there are new characters and new settings and new props and new vehicles and just all new environments in every one of these episodes. It's completely different from episode to episode. Not only that, but each episode is very cinematic in nature. They're not pulling punches. It's very feature film-like in the fact of like, we're going to show this wide. Now we're going to zoom in. We're going to show the character from rear 3/4. We're going to do difficult things. We're going to make it really compelling and cinematic and not pull our punches. We're not going to show everything in the front 3/4. We're not going to make everything very wooden and static. We're going to just be as dynamic as we want. And to not only to have the money for that, but for Nick and the powers that be to be able to willing to spend the funds for that is really demonstrative. And it's cool when that happens and the product resonates, right? Because what if they did all that and this show fell flat on its face? That would have been a whole different conversation we're having now. But, and also very exciting for me that I hear that season 2, completely unspoiled, kind of difficult when you're reading about things, but is storied to be like the Empire Strikes Back of Avatar. Like, it's going to get good both in terms of production and in terms of story and character. So I'm really looking forward to that, because the best is yet to come, which is really exciting. But I couldn't, and also, Kyle, with the vying animation studios or whatever, you have to remember one thing, like a story, an animated series rather, especially one of this magnitude and this scope, they're always going to, and if it's animated overseas, you have overseas animation production. The reason to have that model in place is because oftentimes it's cheaper. And it's another reason why you don't see a lot of, for instance, French or Japanese animation studios doing things, because that has a very Western budget. So that's why things went over to the Philippines and to China and to Korea. I think South Korea is kind of becoming the new Japan now. I'm not sure how much longer that's going to last. That may have already taken place, where South Korea is just as expensive as doing it, in-house or in Canada or in Japan. But the reason to have that in place is to do things a little cheaper with veteran staff, people that really know the trade, experienced craftsmen and artists. But to have 2 or 3 South Korean studios, and I have to investigate this further, but from what I hear, there is a Japanese studio also involved in the series at some point. But to have 2 or 3 South Korean studios working at the same time, there's always going to be a disparity in quality. That's just the nature of art, be it commercial art or whatever kind of art. And these different places have different crews. They have different numbers of people. There's different things that make the quality of the work ebb and flow. But the idea to have at least two running side by side is so you could have more episodes going at once. But I have to say, I fancy myself to have a pretty keen eye for this kind of stuff. I saw some discrepancies in an episode or two where it was like, okay, the C team might be doing this episode, which in this case I thought was particularly odd because it was an earlier episode, which I think is supposed to be an episode where you're setting the tone. You got to be careful there. It's not somewhere in the teens, for instance. But you have these studios running side by side so you can produce more. So the nature of the budget is you got to do it quickly because I'm sure the budgets were high. So how do we make this economically feasible? We do them quickly. So we have 2 or 3 studios running side by side. But I have to say, maybe one of the least egregious series I've ever seen in the fact of like, I wasn't missing something from episode to episode, or I didn't see like, okay, JM is doing this episode and DR Movie is doing this episode. I really didn't see much of that, which is easier said than done, man, because any animation production, even the Peppa Pig, even the simplest thing, really does require a lot of quality and a lot of QC and a lot of consistency. So to have that in a series this complex with this level of drawing, this level of art, this level of complexity and what you're trying to pull off is striking. And it holds up 15 or 16 years later, man. I really, that's why I think it's problematic to create live action versions of these things, be it M. Night Shyamalan or now what Netflix is doing. And I trust Netflix more than I trust anybody. But you already have something of such high quality. It's dangerous to tread into those waters again because now you have such a barometer set so high that it's going to be hard to top or even equal out.
Yeah, they can't resist.
So
they can't resist.
They're doing that right now with Cowboy Bebop, and the jury's still out on that. I'm too early on. I was just
I've heard it's not great, but I don't know anything about that series. But I feel like they just can't resist. I find it so weird because you're right. This, first of all, speaks to, and I talk about this a lot on Sacred Symbols, you can't underestimate the importance of good executives and good producers, people that aren't in the trenches, because they're the ones that keep you on track. They're the ones that monitor things. They're the ones that have the outside eye. And for all the bean counting that we talk about on this show, and there's a lot of that going on, there are a lot of executives that know exactly what they're doing. A lot of producers that know exactly how to engineer a team to produce the exact right product. And I think that comes to bear here. Obviously, I think it's a huge portion of this. And it's so interesting that they had so much control from 2005, 2006, 2007 with those. And then they greenlight this movie that by all accounts is horrible. And it's so interesting to know that. It's like, what? How, it's that's not like a pendulum swinging a little bit in the middle. That's a pendulum widely swinging and having just totally letting go of a product. And then coming back with Legend of Korra and seeing how well received that was, but then seeing like Platinum Games putting out a shitty Korra game and all this. Now they're going back to, because I was looking at Avatar games. I was like, oh shit, there might be some Avatar games that are good that I missed, but not really apparently. I will say the only shortcuts that I might have noticed, and if you would call them shortcuts, is I think that they would go out of their way to not redraw backgrounds sometimes. Like there would be action scenes that would take place in this really close arena. And I'm like, man, I actually said it to Mike out loud. I was like, at one point, I was like, man, they really don't want to draw that background again because it was like going on for so long, like this very contained thing. I feel like the show feels like it should have almost not Dragon Ball like space where it's like happening over fucking miles and eons and shit, but something that's a little wider, a little looser. And I think they actually do a really nice job. You're talking about production, I guess, choices. By keeping backgrounds low texture, by keeping things pretty minimal, and by using a lot of parallax and all sorts of tricks to give depth and movement,
sure,
they do a really nice job. And so when things happen, and I wanted to ask you about this particularly, because I noticed this. This was the one thing I noticed, and I feel like it has to be intentional. When they're on Appa, it's as if they're not moving. And they don't even do the anime line thing in the sky. They don't do anything.
Right.
And I feel like I could look at that and be like, that must be a cost-cutting maneuver. But I don't think it is. I think that's literally the way it's supposed to be, is that it's supposed to be a very calm scene for some reason when they're flying on this thing. And the reason that I don't read negatively into it is because they don't seem to take many shortcuts otherwise. So if there's supposed to be like kinetic movement in that scene, I feel like we would have seen it.
Sure.
So I feel like everything is done very intentionally. And even as a novice of knowing anything about animation, I feel like it stands out. I also really want to give a shout out to just not only the vivid color palette, but the the particular colors and shades that they choose, the blues that they choose, the greens pop, the green, especially the blues though. When you look at like their almost ice climber like or Iceman type outfits, and then you look at the blue of the sky compared to the blue of the ocean, it really, really pops nicely. I also like that they don't fall into, you had said that there's almost Tolkien-esque like mystique to the universe, and I like that they don't fall into seemingly any cliches. For instance, when you meet the Earth people, the Earth Kingdom or whatever they're called, the warriors are women. And I loved that, because what do you expect when you go into Earth? You're caverns and dwarves and armor and heft and
great point, dude.
And instead their warriors are women, right? And so insult the women, it's just the exact opposite. Because you were talking about when we did the Lord of the Rings trilogy, we don't even see a female dwarf.
No, nope.
So I loved that they did little things like that I think kept things fresh too. That was pretty cool and noticeable for me.
Super astute observations, dude. I mean, you just listed off a bunch of things that are like so impressive to me as somebody who fancies himself as a non-artist. It's like, first of all, the colors. Yeah, I that's a really important to shout out to, because even though you have this grounded fantasy-like world that's sort of primitive, right? Everything except for the Fire Nation, who seems to cleverly and strategically build everything out of iron. Besides that, that's sort of the ironwork, smithy end of things. But besides that, it's a very Tolkien-esque fantasy-like world that you would expect. Grounded, muted colors, grass and forests and cliffs and deserts and things. But they still manage to keep things popping with those colorful and vibrant colors. And that's hard to do, man, and really make a world that you want to kind of immerse yourself in, which is really hard to do in a fantasy-like thing. I love the Lord of the Rings. I love Peter Jackson's versions. They're not colorful movies by any degree.
No, not at all.
Not at all. And, that could also be a strategy. But that, and also, I mean, that observation about flying was something I noticed too, Colin. I'm impressed that you noticed that. There was sort of something in there, even when Appa's flying along at a lumbering pace and are not escaping from something or getting somewhere urgently. They do have a sort of lack of showing that panning background. It doesn't have to be dynamic speed lines, anime like you're saying. It could just be clouds moving slowly in the distance, or some sort of multi-plane thing where you see the cliffs moving and you see the clouds behind that moving a little slower. There are scenes, especially middle shots and close-ups, where it does feel very static and it feels like a mistake. It's like, are they flying right now, or are they staying still with a blue? Is Appa?
Yeah, I didn't know if it was supposed to be mystical or not.
No, I just think it was a miss. I just think we were just talking about this at work the other day, because we're getting a lot of the animatics for our project are being done in India. The animation's being done in India, which is not unexpected, but the animatics, which are the moving storyboards, kind of the foundation and construction for the whole process, a really key part of the process in animation the animatics are being done in India. And they're getting a lot of notes back from our side of things, from the muckety mucks and the writers and stuff. I'm not really involved in that too much. But I was saying, there's got to be some sort of discipline where in the notes process in animation, especially for something as heavy as the animatics and as formative as the animatics, where you have to give all your notes. And then you have to go through and say, we could only send 75% of these. So which bottom 25% of these notes make the least amount of sense to send? In other words, which of these notes are the least important? We got to get them out of here. We'll send India 75% of these notes. We have to compromise. And I think with that, with the flying thing and the panning backgrounds and just having that extra element in there was a thing where they just ran out of time. It's like you could only do so much. So there's going to be things you want to do. There's going to be things left on the cutting room floor, things that you didn't have time to go after. And the other thing is, I have to give a shout out to the art direction for the series so far, because it does shift so drastically from episode to episode in terms of locale, in terms of characters outside of the main characters that we're dealing with, and the tech and all that kind of stuff. And the art direction is very consistent, even though they're showing us new characters and new environments and new tribes and what their clothing and garb looks like, and what their housing looks like, and their worlds and their villages and all that kind of stuff. It's really consistent. And that's hard to pull off when you're doing so much in such a little amount of time. And it's ambitious. It's even more ambitious than anime, and especially OAV anime or television anime in a lot of instances, because there's not a lot of those very stylized scenes where you get the medium shot of the character and the head and the hair and the headband are blowing, but it's just panning and, with the mouth flap. It's very ambitious in terms of the animation that they have in each episode. And they might go down to threes here and there. But besides that, it really even trumps a lot of anime in a lot of cases, which you don't see that or hear that a lot about Avatar. But it is true. It's really that impressive. And even the ability, talk about the levity in terms of the writing and what the characters are saying and dialogue and everything. It was also pretty early on for anime. Anime hadn't caught on like wildfire in 2005 like it has now, certainly 15 years down the road. But there is this willingness to cross the characters over with sort of the chibi, cartoony, silly expressions.
Right.
Which was a really bold move for a Western television show back then. It was something that kids weren't yet steeped in fully. They didn't know it like they know it today. Doing it today is less of it's more of like, yeah, of course we're going to do that. It's anime. But back then it was pretty new territory and to tread. And I thought that was really cool that they do that too. And also part of the comedy in the show, which I think would have bothered me in my late 20s watching this, but now I'm much more acceptable of like, all right, that's just a stylistic choice. And again, when you carry it through consistently, it doesn't become a shortcut. It's the style of the show, and it's very meaningful in the fact of not only the look, but the levity that springs out of that, which I think is something that's thoughtful, another thoughtful element of the show.
For sure. I think that's probably the all-encompassing word is just thoughtful. I think it's a good show. I think it's high quality. I think it must have been, to your point about the anime just influences, it must have been a gateway for many kids into anime. And I wonder, you couldn't really prove it, but there's got to be some causation between people, or correlation, I should say, between people watching Avatar and then anime growing in the West. I mean, anime is just a huge thing today. And I wonder if it began here. There are obviously others, and I would obviously say that there are other more influential ones too, including Dragon Ball, but and of course Cowboy Bebop and others too. But I feel like maybe this was something a little more accessible. It was on Nickelodeon. It wasn't on Cartoon Network in the middle of the night. It was on Nickelodeon on prime time, and getting a lot of love from a longtime trusted source of quality children's entertainment and quality children's animation. And whether it's Doug or Ren and Stimpy or the Wild Thornberrys or Hey Arnold or whatever, like this just really stands out against that first 15 years or so of original animation coming from the Nicktoons kind of quadrant. And so I feel like there's something notable here from an economic and production point of view too, that I would like to know more about as we move on into the second and third seasons. The one thing I wanted to ask you is what would your element be? What would you want to spend?
That's so funny. I had that on my list to ask you as well. Yeah. So, all right. So beer, booze, and drugs don't count.
Yeah.
I have to go for air just because of flight.
Right.
I wish. It kind of bothers me that Aang has to use that glider. As cool as that glider is, to have that little prop that he uses to get around and kind of channeling the air currents to fly around on that thing. I kind of want him to fly around like Superman or One Punch Man for some reason. I think it would just be cooler, but who knows? Maybe for all we know, maybe he gets to that point. Maybe he doesn't even need the glider anymore.
He may. Yeah, I like the design of that thing too. It was like a staff or whatever.
Yeah, and then it opens up into that, fans out into that glider shape. What about you, Kyle? What's your element of choice?
I think I would go with Earth because I think it would be the one that would be most unusual for my body type and size and personality. So you wouldn't expect that I would necessarily use that. But I think it would be cool if you expect someone like Juggernaut to be able to bash the Earth and bring, something like that.
That's a good point.
The Thing or whatever. But for me to be able to not even, I would want to use it like telekinetically. Like I wouldn't want to but I think it would be cool to be able to manipulate Earth and dirt and rocks and stuff and all of that.
Yeah, the Earthbenders were cool, man. They leave the most question marks so far in the first 20 episodes because it seems like they could do a lot. Like they could dig the earth up or stone up out of the ground and it's already in like a cylindrical shape, or it's in a ball shape. It's all in the, that
Very
must be
convenient.
all in the bending, not only
Yeah.
to be able to heft tons of rock, but also to be able to like form bridges. And now you have stalactites and stalagmites, and you're doing all this crazy thing with shaping the stone. It's interesting. The only thing that really leaves me sort of, it does seem a little imbalanced to me so far. Like earth and fire seem like, well, maybe air. I think air and water seem like, I don't know, the least, water especially. Let's just say the water bending seems like, now I know you could, water bending translates into ice bending and being able to form ice, and then there's some sort of healing that we see Katara channeling too. There's some healing powers associated with water bending, which is cool, which I can't wait to see more of. But it just seems like water is not going to be any match for fire, earth, and possibly wind. And I only say wind or air because it's said that he could summon like gale like winds, like hurricane like strength from this airbending. So that seems like, I want to see how water is going to play into this, because water, of course, like a force to be reckoned with in real life and science and nature. But did you get that sense too? It's like, all right,
Yeah.
how's water going to vie here? Like, how's that going to hold up?
I thought about that too. And I also thought about the one unfortunate thing, although I understand the way that how they do this in the structure of protagonist and antagonist, it's just kind of, it is a little cliche that the fire is aligned with the bad guys. It would have been cool to maybe mix that up a little bit too. But it is, you're right. It does feel a little unbalanced, but I think that that's part of the story. They're supposed to feel like they're under siege, and clearly, clearly air, at least pound for pound, didn't stand up to
Good
fire
point.
in their ethos, in their world. The other thing I wanted to just point out is I really was struck by and I brought it up earlier, but the whole moon thing, the sacrifice of that girl
Yeah.
into the fish or whatever,
So sad.
and the yin and the yang or whatever. I really, and like the kind of lost love there and her engagement and all of that. I really found that arc strangely emotional and sad. And I wanted to give that a shout out because there was a lot of levity and a lot of wasted time in the series so far for me, in my opinion. And I feel like they did a really nice job of focusing in, like giving some character. And you know, in some way, Sokka is like he's tragic, and
Definitely.
I really like that they kind of played that up. Like you almost thought they were going to get a new party member or something, right? And as it were, and it goes the exact opposite. And it was really quite tragic and sad. So, and I really like
it
that.
was, and it was sudden also, and it did. Yeah, and Sokka is such an interesting character because he's largely comic relief, and he kind of feels left out. You have this, I don't know if it's a budding romance or a budding friendship between Aang and Katara, but he often seems like a third wheel, even though he's Katara's brother, right? I love the yin and yang relationship between Sokka and Katara, that you have this sort of siblings, one's pessimistic and sarcastic and wisecracking and a little too brash, a little too quick to rush in, and the other one is seems to have a lot more wisdom, and she's optimistic, and she's a little more patient. So I love that yin and yang relationship. But Sokka, yeah, for some reason he just you love him. He has a great personality, great voice acting, but and so he has some growth too, because he kind of goes from this quick to rush in, really the tendency to look before he leaps type of thing, to sort of going through this journey of becoming more thoughtful and more optimistic, like his beloved sister. And he has that whole thing that comes on late in the season where he's pretty bright and he has this penchant for engineering and all that kind of stuff, which is kind of cool. But it was kind of a sad little thing to throw him at the end, in the end, where he finds like a love that was going to probably be unrequited anyway, interestingly enough, but that ends even more tragically than we initially expected, which was kind of a late bit of heartbreak to introduce us right in the last episode, actually.
Yeah,
right?
I just thought it was very emotional and surprisingly dark for the tenor of most of the show, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. A show showing loss like that.
Yeah, and you said it earlier, the show is rife with lessons that are, I think, overt, some of them not so overt, or at least the willingness to bring up lots of different topics. I mean, did you notice how they bring up vegetarianism like
Yeah.
a lot. They bring
Yeah.
up, I love they bring up like misogyny in the first episode, I think, stuff like that. So there's a lot of different subject matter that I think adds to the series as a serial, but also like a serialized series, but also has a bit of a procedural school, after school special kind of thing going on. But it's not really overbearing to me.
Yeah, it
So I
doesn't
think it
beat
all
you
just
over the
works.
head.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think so too. Dig, is there anything unsaid about the show?
You know what? There's one. I'm really looking forward to season 2. It's interesting what you say about. I could totally see your perspective on this as far as there being. We talked about this with. What did we talk about this with? Maybe the most recent Battlestar Galactica season that we covered, where there were a lot of seemingly filler episodes, bottle episodes, departures, one-offs, whatever you want to call.
Yeah,
them.
that was season 3 of Battlestar. We were talking.
That was
about
season 3. That was and that was the most recent one we covered.
Right.
With this, I really didn't mind it because to me it was just character building and world building, and I like the characters in the world. But I did find myself getting impatient sometimes where it's like, oh, let's get back to the main story. Where is Prince Zuko? Whatever, that type of thing. One thing I'm looking forward to, and I'm anticipating for season 2, is the Uncle Iroh character. I think they show him just enough to be compelling. He's sort of a tease because you don't see him too often. But here you have like the uncle to the prince who's serving as his nephew's advisor. And from the very beginning, I was asking myself about this character because he seems to fly in the face of everything we know about the Fire Nation. He's the exact antithesis to his angry and brooding nephew. He's calm and he's gentle and he's wise and spends a good deal amount of time drinking tea and trying to impart wisdom to his raging young
musical instruments and shit.
nephew. Yeah, he's fun, almost to the point where I thought it was a misdirect. It was like, no, this guy's going to be evil, but I think what it is he's the force instilling whatever good is left in his nephew. And I'm really looking forward to seeing more of him and that apparent goodness and humanity and the fact of like maybe that's rubbing off on his nephew to sort of detract from all the rage and wanting to get back into good standing with the Fire Nation and all that kind of stuff. I love the warmth and the wisdom and the compassion of that character. And I find myself hoping it was real and not some, like you go along with Prince Zuko and make sure he stays away, or maybe lead him into danger so he gets killed off, or whatever could have been going on there. And I think it's on the up and up, but I really want to see now. Pretty sure it is.
Don't we see him get like infuriated at the moon situation, which is cool, And
that was a striking scene when he threatens Admiral Zhao. He says like, either release her or like, I'm going to unleash my wrath on you, and not so many words. That was like, whoa. Cause that's really the first time it's not the first time you see him in action. You do see what he's capable of in earlier episodes. And you've kind of figured that this is like a Yoda-like figure. He's not going to flaunt it, but he definitely has that power.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't seem worried about anything. So that
he's not, he's just completely carefree. Everything rolls off his shoulders. But that's another thing, to have that secondary antagonist, that Admiral Zhao character, also who's, basically this ambitious officer still serving the Fire Nation under Lord Ozai. And he's the rival to Prince Zuko because they're both going after the same thing. So by having this Admiral Zhao character in there, it creates a race. You have two different bad guys not aligned with each other, basically racing to the same goal, which created, again, just really clever writing. Simple, but really clever writing. It helped to create that tension and helped to create that sort of rival faction between two bad guys, both vying for the I guess you would say the favor of their leader.
Yeah.
Which is cool. That was really cool to see. So there's plenty to see. And I want to see more of the siblings. I want to see more of Sokka and Katara. And I want to see more of Aang. You want to see more of everything at this point. And you get that teaser at the end where the Fire Nation, Prince Zuko's sister is going to come on the scene. And he talks a little bit about her, that she was the favored one. She was the powerful one, and she's the ambitious one. So we're going to have a new antagonist.
Yeah, it's cool. Like I like Also with Fire Lord Sozin, like the inclusion of the comet, I thought was like really eerie. I always find comets eerie. I think they're super eerie, especially when no one knew what they were and they would just appear and go across the sky and portend whatever you wanted them to portend. So there's a lot of cool mysticism there too. And the only thing
Definitely.
that I wish that they took advantage of more, and I understand why they didn't, it's not political enough for me. And I don't mean that in like raw fucking intrigue and stuff like that, but I just wish we knew a little more about why there seems to be no, like, what is the point of all of this? There has to be a point. Even the Nazis had a point, in
Right.
quotes. Like, we knew what the point for them was. It wasn't a good point. I just wanted to know, like, what is the win condition? Just domination? Because I don't understand why. Like, to what end? You know
That
what I mean?
smacks of Star Wars too, though, with the Empire. It's like, why?
Yeah, exactly. Because like when I think about Nazism, for instance, like the great evil in our real timeline, in our real world, like we knew why. It was cultural domination, racial purity, Lebensraum, the idea of having living space and farmland,
Right.
and access to gas and oil and minerals. Like that's where the evil came from. So it's like, okay, what is the Fire Nation going after? And I'm not trying to be in there with their diplomats trying to figure out what they're trying to figure out. I just want to know more about that world. And I hope that we get that in the second episode. And frankly, or the second season. And frankly, Empire does bring some of that into Star Wars. For instance, with the battlefield promotion and all that kind of stuff, which is one of the great scenes. So maybe we'll get some more of that here too. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about Avatar: The Last Airbender Season 1. Available now on Netflix as of the time we're recording this. I assume it's going to stay there since they're working on a series, as Dagan said, a live action series. And we'll get back to it as the months roll on. Dagan, should we end as we always do with a dad joke?
Kyle, I have to investigate this further, but the power struggle or whatever it is between the Avatar creators and Viacom/Paramount, Nickelodeon, and Netflix seems to be going back and forth. Like there's some sort of wrestling. I think it ended up back. I think Netflix is still producing the live action series as far as I know, but I think what I heard last, and I have to vet this information, is that Nickelodeon/Viacom/Paramount
Plus
started their own animation studio just to do Avatar related content. I have to look into that further, but that because of something that happened that they were unhappy with at Netflix, I think they ended up wrestling control back to the Viacom camp. And now there's some sort of offing of new animated content under this completely Avatar-esque umbrella. That's the last I heard. So it's interesting. That's another interesting part of the conversation is this is going on in contemporary 2021, 2022 times. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out because it is an empire for the powers that be, for the Netflixes and for the Paramounts. It's still a big deal. So talk about getting 20 years on, right? And so that's another big part of the conversation. Kyle, I have another big and we get criticized for not talking about the music. I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I wasn't hit over the head with the music. I didn't really. I always think about it. I think the music fits the bill. I think it's fine. I think sometimes it seems like it accompanies the emotion of what's going on in the scene. It gets big when things get big in the show. But I'll tell you what I miss about this. And going back to a cartoon like Mysterious Cities of Gold, which is one of the greatest animated theme songs of all time. We're missing that catchy, gotta hear it, gotta be on the couch in time for the opening, right? G.I. Joe, Transformers. Sure. That we're missing that era of catchy opening theme songs in cartoons. I really want to see a return to that. Like the SpongeBob theme song is great, and the SpongeBob theme songs from the 90s. But you know what I mean? We really that's what I really would love to see with a thing like Avatar. It's like, get that theme song, whether it's instrumental or vocals or whatever, but we're really missing that sort of catchy theme song that makes us want to be in time to watch every second of every episode. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's interesting. You're right. Like it still comes from that era too, where that was acceptable. We have the shorter intros and the not so time wasty intros now.
Yeah, we don't want to spend too much of our time, blow too much of our load on an intro.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's true too. That's a good point. Kyle,
Yeah.
I got a very special one for us today from
Please.
our sister, Allie
Oh.
Scoop Moriarty. Al, they don't like this one. It's on you, my friend. Kyle, why did the snail paint a big S on his car?
I don't know.
Because he wanted to see people shout, "Look at that S car go!" Not bad. Hey, you laughed.
Pretty good. That's pretty good.
Not too
That's pretty good.
Cute. I would say cute. This falls in the cute
that
camp.
Yeah, sure. Well, Allie, appreciate that. And Dagan, appreciate you, and appreciate all of you guys out there supporting our show on Last Stand's Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia, on YouTube and Last Stand Media there, podcast services, etc. Buy merch at laststandmedia.shop. That's it. It's episode 200.
200, dude.
Now, it's a little anticlimactic for us because we've actually recorded 201, 203, 201, 202,
Right.
203, and 204 already. So, but for you, guys, it's exciting. We hope you enjoyed the surprise
Be excited.
topic, and we'll be back to it to continue it. So, thank you all out there. Love you. Goodbye. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.